Hi there, I hope you're doing well. It's Amy, and I'm here to share with you today a spring junk journal that I made. It has a necklace charm, I guess you could say, junk journal charm, and I'll review that with you. This spring journal is made from a placemat, and I will share with you how I made it. So let's start with this, I guess that's what you call it. It's just a journal charm, and it's basically like a necklace, if you will, for your junk journal. And so what it is I took chain and just doubled it in length for the size of my journal, and then I added, let me show you how it's attached. It's attached in here with a lobster clasp, and I just added a jump ring onto the end, and then I've got room where it can grow. And basically what I did was I just did some wire wrapping of beads, various beads. There's acrylic and plastic beads, glass beads, and added a bunch of charms. So I've got some, let's see, a bow, a heart, there's a butterfly, there's some seed beads there. There's this like little pom-pom one. There's a glass butterfly there. There's a key here, another bow, and then just a lot of like little fun charms and beads that I added to it. And it goes the length of the journal. And what I like about this is that it can expand. So let me show you again. So if this is my center of my journal, it just clasps on, and I just have a little jump ring, which hopefully you can see that. There's a little jump ring right here. And I did use an extra large or a larger lobster clasp because it's just easier for me. And then I put beads. If you look at this, I put beads starting at the top and then beads down here to the bottom. And I did leave some space, and the reason being is because, let me show it to you from this angle. I didn't want beads on the inside so you wouldn't have that bulk, but there's plenty of room for this to grow. In fact, I'm sure I could have made it, smaller, not used as much chain, but I wasn't sure. This is the first time I've ever made one of these before. And I had seen something online. It was a Bible journaling group was making basically these for their Bibles, and it was a little bit different. I don't know if it had this many charms and beads on it, and I have no idea how it was attached on the inside. I just know that it was a chain, and so I thought I wanted to try my take on it, and that's what I came up with. And I like the noise that it makes. So it's nice and jingly, if you will, and it hangs pretty nicely. I don't know. So yeah. This journal, when I started out with it, it was intended to be kind of like a traveling journal, and therefore I wanted it to be a cloth or like a soft cover and not a hardback book or a chipboard base. And what it is this is a placemat. So if your placemat basically is, like this in length, I cut off a bit and then folded it up to make this pocket. And then I sewed on this little like blanket seam binding edge just because it was a rough edge to create the pocket. So that's how I created this journal. And what is nice about it is it's not water repellent completely, but if you get some drops or like a spill on it, it does like bead up, and it's nice. Now, if it's nice that you can dry it quickly, but obviously if it gets saturated, no, it's gonna, get wet through, but it is somewhat, I guess, water repellent, if you will, or water resistance. Maybe that's a better word for it. All right, so let's take a look at the inside. Oh, it's got one signature, sorry. And I did use eyelets. I put on, when I stitched it on, I just stitched in my signature. I used eyelets. I thought it might be a little bit easier when sewing it in. And then it is made with various, let's see, vintage papers. There's some coffee dyed papers or dyed papers in here. And then there's a paper pack. And the paper pack that I used was, I think it was Joann's last collection. Right before they announced that they were basically going to be closing, and it was during that spring Easter line that came out. I think that was officially the last line. And yeah, so they had a floral paper pack, and I really liked it. I'm excited that I could use it because it went with all these colors. So, it's got the purples and the pinks and the yellows and the greens, and I just thought it looked really nice with this placemat here. So, yeah, it's one signature, 16 pages, and it got a little chunky already just because that's the way that I am. And again, my signature pocket, I always have a pocket in the front and in the back because I like to tuck in ephemera or things that maybe I want to add into my journal. And let's see, on this first page, this is a vintage page from a cookbook, and it's for berried cherries. And then this is a tuck spot, and I made this with a cut apart from the paper pad. And then this is a vintage playing card from the Greenbrier. And then I had this little cluster at top. And then on the back, I've just covered it in cardstock so you could use it, you know, to journal on, maybe add a photo or something. This is from the paper pack as well. This is some dyed paper. And on this page, I just backed this little like ticket, if you will, these little numbered tickets on some cardstock because it's pretty thin. It's like the new bingo cards, I guess you would say. If you see them, they're those little thin like newsprint type paper. So I backed it on that so it could become a journal card stitched around it. And I added this image from one of my floral books. And then this is a cut apart or a tag that came from the paper pad. And I just added a little eyelet and some purple twine or string. And this is a paper pad that I think I got this from Temu. I can't remember, to be honest with you, but it is printed front and back, and it's to look like old ledger paper. And this is from the paper pack. I just love the bees and the pansies. The colors are just really pretty. This is from a vintage floral book. This is from the paper pack as well. And this is some little ruffle, pink or purple gingham ruffle trim on the edge. And then I made a pocket. And then I made this tag, which I backed with, it's a floral book page, and I backed it with cardstock. So you'd have, you know, a writing space or, again, whatever you want to do on the back of that. And then I added this little fabric floral print trim for like a little tab. And over here again, this is some paper that I got when I got this green one, this green ledger paper. I got this one at the same time, and it's printed front and back, but it looks like a billing receipt, I guess. This is a paper from, I think it's Better Homes and Gardens garden book. And then this is some distressed paper, and then I added a tag from the paper pack here with a little eyelet again and some of this little striped twine. And then it flips out, and then in here is some, it's a piece of acetate with butterflies, these white butterflies on it. And then I have that clipped with a paper clip, and then just that has some like little sari silk on the edge. And this is a little die cut from Hobby Lobby. Here's some vintage sheet music. This is a book page from a vintage Denison little book on butterflies and insects, I believe. And then this is, I made a little like scrappy pack using a piece of paper from the paper pad. And then I did add lace. And then these are just some vintage sheet music and book page. And that just tucks in here. And then that is from the paper pad as well. Over here, I made a tuck spot, again with that printed paper from the paper pack, some sheet music, added a label here. There is some, this is the doily down here. There is a little Tim Holtz embellishment there and a little jewelry tag, and I stamped the word line on that. And then this is some pink and white trim on the edge. And then I made like a giant tag with a vellum pocket, and I did an altered guest check with just some fabric and some vintage sheet music. And I think this is from a tablecloth. And then this is a cut apart from the paper pack. This is some vintage graph paper. And then I have tucked in here just a kind of like a collaged journaling tag, which is various papers from the paper pack and some vintage papers. And then this is just a floral cutout that I did. And then this is a tab that I made with a paper pack, and it's got a piece of lace and then a jewelry tag here that I stamped the 9190 on, and then I sewed a button on there. And then this is a vintage book page, some vintage stationery, another vintage book page. I just reinforced it with some muslin because I was worried about it being a little fragile, and I wanted it to make sure that it would be stable in here and could withhold like adding things to it and so forth, and being turned the pages. And this is a piece of mixed media paper, and then I have this little ruffle trim on the edge, this little like buttercream ruffle. And then over here I have a scrapbook piece of paper from the paper pad, another of the vintage floral book from the floral book that I backed with cardstock. And then I did a little flip out with an envelope. And this is a printable, or no, a piece of ephemera from a die pack at Hobby Lobby. And this is also from Hobby Lobby. And then inside I just have a piece of vintage stationery that I just folded in half. And that's all clipped with just this little paper clip that has some eyelash trim on it. Over here, I made a pocket with the paper pack paper, or from the paper pack pad, excuse me. And then this is just a piece from the paper pack as well, or pad. And it's a nice journaling card. This is some vintage floral book page. And then I made this journaling card, and it's from a catalog for seeds and flowers. And I just added that little vintage piece of gingham fabric that I stitched on at the top. Just added this little trim here to the edge here. This is a vintage label. And then I added this journaling card. And then this just flips out, if you will. And I have a little page edge that I've just used some fabric and vintage book page and some labels, and it's stitched on. And this is a piece of vintage stationery, and it is backed with cardstock. And then in the back side of this pocket for the scrap paper, I made a little cluster down here with a label and some book page and a butterfly and some muslin fabric, or cheesecloth. I think that's cheesecloth, sorry. And then this is a vintage flashcard, and I just added this little piece of vintage like ribbon there to cover the little square, if you will. And then on this page, I've got a book page, that pocket that I made, and I tucked in this little cut apart from the collection, the paper pack collection. And that gets tucked into this little glassine bag. And then this is from Hobby Lobby, another one of their little pieces of ephemera. And then over here, I just decorated a junk mail envelope, window envelope. And then I have it with this mother and daughter and this little baby in the background with all these flowers. It's really sweet. And there's a little cluster here. Over here, I made this page edge with strips from the paper pack that were left over. And then I had this little striped like chiffon ribbon. And then there's a book page underneath that, and then some lace trim. Some vintage stationery. And then I just did a little collaging on this Western Union telegram piece and did back it on cardstock to make it a little bit sturdier, because it's kind of flimsy paper, lightweight paper. I made with the cut apart, I just made this little tuck spot to tuck this in this. Another little flip out. I did a little collaging on this voucher and a little tuck tag spot there. And here's another cut apart tag from the collection. This is also from the paper collection. I just made kind of like a little folio so you have room to journal or write on or add photos or whatever. And then this is just like a little bookmark. Here's a little cluster that I made with some fabric and burlap and trims. And then here's a cut apart from the paper pad collection. It flips out. This is a piece of stationery that I backed on some craft cardstock, and then I just used some vintage papers and then a T label that says, "What a desolate place would be a world without a flower." Ooh, let me say that again. What a desolate place would be a world without a flower. So I just thought that applied really nicely. And then for this piece, I just made this tiny little flip out and a little tall skinny tag. And then I tucked in a vintage floral paper. And then this opens up, so you've got plenty of like journaling spot or hidden journaling. And this is just a little cluster here with another little tag. And there's some a doily and lace and fabric and another piece of printed fabric down there. And then it's got this little gingham ruffle trim down there. And that's it. And then we're back to the pocket. These are just some extras that I have that I didn't include in there. And then my maker's mark. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, just leave me a message if you want in the comments. Thanks. Take care. Bye.